Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thanks for joining us today. This is our fourth and final event in our series, our spring series of Off to College Conversations. This one is titled All Things Off to College with CDN, and we're really glad that you're with us if you're tuning in live or catching the recording later. We're really excited to welcome you to this program. My name is Diane Rose. I am the program manager of education here at the College Diabetes Network. And I am really excited about these conversations that we have been having throughout the spring. For those of you that are new to the College Diabetes Network, just a little bit of information. We are a nonprofit organization, and we provide peer support, education, and leadership development opportunities for all young adults with diabetes. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of our programs or things we can do to support you, at the end of the conversation. Before we turn it over to our speakers on our panel tonight, I do want to let everyone know that our chat is open. If you've got some questions or if you've got a thought or something to contribute, please drop it into the chat. And hopefully we'll have time at the end of our conversation today to answer some live questions and hear directly from our panelists. So today's conversation is specifically geared towards this time right now. Move-in day or heading into college, that the countdown is on, for all young adults that are heading off to college for the first time. Summer involves things like packing, meeting your roommate, ordering supplies for your dorm. But for a young adult with diabetes, there's some additional important things to add to your preparations. And today, that's what we're going to cover. So I'm going to turn things over to our panelists. We're very lucky to have Dr. Jen McVean with Medtronic, who is facilitating our discussion today. Welcome, Dr. McVean. And on our panel, some other voices you'll hear from are students have lived through this experience, caregivers, and an additional clinician doctor perspective, just so to make sure that you're hearing from all sides of the equation. And I'm going to hand things off. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Dr. Jen McVean. I am a pediatric endocrinologist and a medical director at Medtronic Diabetes. I recently joined Medtronic, and prior to that, I've spent my career taking care of children, young adults, and adolescents with type 1 diabetes and doing research starting technology in diabetes. But I think that the real reason I was chosen to be here today is because I also live with type 1 diabetes and went to college. I am a proud graduate of Northwestern University, which I attended between 1994 and 1998. Go Wildcats! Which means that I walked uphill in the snow to class both ways with no CGM and no pump. And I'm here to tell you about it today, which means what I want you to know is with everything going on, there's a lot of craziness and sometimes worry and excitement, but it's all going to be okay. And so now it's my great pleasure to introduce you to the much younger panelists for the most part. And we're going to kick it off with Shay, and she's going to tell you a little bit about herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shay Webb, and I've lived with type 1 for the last 15 years, come November 5th of this year. And I'm actually a proud graduate of the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, where I majored in clinical research for my bachelor's and am majoring in it as well now for my master's. And I too have been in college. Currently, I am a medical writer in the clinical research industry, so I'm excited to learn more about type 1. But I've been there, I've moved in, I've joined clubs, I've joined Greek life, and I've been in leadership. So I've been in your shoes or the shoes you're about to be in, and I can only say it's only up from here. It may seem like the end of high school, but this is the beginning of a new journey, and I'm excited to share my insights, but also answer your questions for tonight.
Thank you so much, Shay. And up next, we have Crystal. Crystal, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Crystal Diaz. I was diagnosed with type 1 in 2019, so that's 3 years ago now. Yep. I'm a founding member of my CDN at UC Davis, where I'm graduating in 2 days. So I'm really excited. I'm getting my Bachelor's of Science in Global Disease Biology. And I also served as a Next Gen Fellow last year with CDN. And I was diagnosed right before I went to college. So I'm hoping to shed some insight on what that scary experience is like and give you some hope about what's to come.
Great. Thank you, Crystal. All right, Katie, you are up next.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Katie. I am a pediatric nurse practitioner as well as a nurse scientist at the Joslin Diabetes Center. And I'm here today to just lend a little bit more clinician perspective. I have a research interest in emerging adults and the transition from pediatric to adult care, and really the emotional work of diabetes. So I'm really excited to be here and just lend a little bit more clinician perspective.
Awesome. And finally, last but not least, Melissa. Oh, we can't hear you, Melissa.
Thank you. My name is Melissa Anderson. I am the mother of 3 adult children, one of whom has type 1 diabetes. She was diagnosed in 2011, and she just finished her junior year in college. We live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and she went her freshman year to NYU, so clear across the country. And fortunately, she transferred to UC Berkeley, and she recently restarted the UC Berkeley chapter of CDN. But I'm hoping to help other family, parents, and caregivers know that this can be done, and it can be done well, and your kids are ready to go.
Awesome. I'm really excited for everything the panel has to share. Before we jump in, we want to acknowledge it's a little different going off to college, depending on if you're someone who was recently diagnosed with diabetes, or if you've lived with diabetes for quite a while, or if you're the person living with diabetes, or you're a caregiver or part of the diabetes village. So if you want to just chat, drop your connection to diabetes into the chat, that would be awesome. So where do we start? Well, we start right now at the beginning. There is a lot going on, graduation, some endings, some new beginnings. So members of the panel, take us back to the beginning of your journey. What were you feeling like? What tools and support systems did you use to navigate those feelings? Because there are a lot of feelings right now. And I'm going to kick it off with Shay.
Sure. So a lot of the tools that I started off using came from my Disability Resource Center on my campus. That's where I got a lot of ideas about things and a lot of connections to start off with, because my campus didn't have a college diabetes network. I had honestly never really actually heard of it until I started looking it up one day. Like, what are resources for college students with diabetes? And it was the first thing that popped up. So it really made me curious to start a chapter on my campus. So I got the chapter started, but then we had a huge hurricane hit the coast. So right after that, it seemed like everything got put on a hiatus. And during that time, another student wanted to start his chapter on campus, but I had already done it, and we didn't know each other. We didn't know that we existed, but there we go, another T1 connection. And we ended up making our chapter named Dubs for Diabetes. And while I was there, I was the co-founder and the vice president for a while. And then in addition to that, just further down the line, being a fellow with Crystal, and figuring out all these things, especially as a student or a graduating student, it made it a lot easier to navigate those feelings that, okay, there's literally a network of people who can relate to me. And it's not that I'm on my own, but, I can reach out to people, I can talk to people. But initially, when I got to campus, I was fortunate enough to have gone to an early college that was connected to the campus I already went to. So before I graduated, I went to the dorms and I asked them, what are the accommodations for people with type 1? Do we have any, or is there any that can be made? And I started making those connections and stepping outside of boundaries, but also looking at what's already established on campus. And honestly, I think to wrap up that question, going to college made me also realize that just because a person doesn't have diabetes doesn't mean they're not a connection. So sometimes it's the friends and the professors and the people around you on campus who are going to help you and may know just as much about diabetes or you can teach them just as much about diabetes so that they can be a really big support system if you can't always find those people who have type 1 or who are comfortable with sharing that they have it.
Thank you, Shay. That's so great that you went out and found those resources and that you found a village, right? Diabetes is, there's people with diabetes, but there's also all the other people in our villages. So wonderful. Crystal, how did you navigate the feelings and look for support systems?
Yeah. After graduation, I was really scared. I was just diagnosed in April of my senior year, so I had been living with diabetes for about 2 months when I was deciding where I wanted to go to college. But like Shay, I was looking up college and type 1 diabetes, and can I really go off 300 miles away from home with this new thing in my hand? And yeah, College Diabetes Network was there, and I went through all the resources, the booklets, and that definitely helped. And my parents were a big part of my support system and my diabetes village, as you would say. And yeah, that really helped me in gaining confidence and deciding to go to my dream school. So. Yeah.
Well, it's so wonderful to hear that the College Diabetes Network was there for you right away, because having only been diagnosed a couple of months before, well, gosh, what a huge transition, you know? So that is really wonderful support. Katie, will you chime in from a healthcare provider perspective about, you know, how do these college students navigate these feelings with all this change?
Well, I think it's really important to recognize that these feelings are really big and they're real and they're valid. This is a huge transition. You have to go off to college and now you have to feed yourself, clothe yourself, go to class, make all new friends, and manage diabetes. This is huge. So recognizing that there are a lot of feelings associated with all of these changes is just really important. And I'll just throw out there that, of course, CDN, your friends, social media, all of those things are terrific, but also your healthcare providers can also be resources to help give you some support during this transition, because we've also walked many patients through this transition. So always know that your healthcare team is always there to help you through.
Thank you, Katie. I think that's such an important perspective, that like these feelings are normal. This is a lot. This is, like you said, this is big. All right. And Mom, Melissa, bring it home for us.
Yeah, I probably should have checked this beforehand, but Katie graduated in 2018. She took a gap year, so she was pre-pandemic, and I'm not sure what the resources are now, but CDN has this really great booklet, or did, called Off to College, and there's a version for parents and there's a version for kids, and we used that sort of as our guidebook for how do we have these conversations, what do we need to think about, what are the things that we might want to have in place as Katie heads off across country. I certainly was nervous and concerned about whether or not she was going to be able to do this. I shouldn't have been, but those booklets were really helpful, especially in the back. There's a sort of a contract for conversations that happen. You know, how do you want to talk about diabetes? Because diabetes is going to look different during college. They're busy. They eat at strange hours and things they probably didn't eat a lot of at home. And they do things differently than caregivers might. So just because they do things differently, they care for their diabetes differently, doesn't make it wrong. But it just is different. So having those conversations and being open to doing things differently is helpful. I'm a very practical person, and so I put my efforts into a sick day kit. I made a sick day kit for Katie that had, you know, cans of soup and some Gatorade and some, you know, I don't know, acetaminophen and, you know, some of those things that she might need if she was going to be a thermometer, you know, those kinds of things, because I knew she was going to get sick and I was worried about what would happen when she got sick, and I could focus my energy into making the best sick day kit imaginable and not bug her about all the things that she was worried about. So that's how we managed it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that perspective. Well, let's be honest, the next couple months before going off to college are crazy, right? There's a lot of stuff to do. Packing, organizing, saying goodbye to friends, and we're not even talking about diabetes yet, right? So focusing a little bit more on diabetes and talking about organizing diabetes supplies and packing them and what to bring and what do you wish you would have brought that you didn't? Shay, can you give us some kind of perspective on that?
Definitely. And I can start off saying when it comes to getting school supplies, getting stuff for your dorm, things like that, I'm all for making things cute and making things as interior decorative friendly as possible. And one of the things with diabetes, it's like a lot of times we're in this mindset that we have to use these bags that are prepackaged for us, that are made specifically for our diabetes kids, or that, we have to have things in this order. When honestly, you can be creative as you want to be because it's your disease, it's your supplies, you can do whatever you need to. And for me, what I learned at the very end that I wish I had thought of at the beginning is that when it comes to all my pump supplies, my needles, emergency kits, stuff like that, I bought a makeup case and I got one that I can lock up. So, especially if you're in your dorm or you have a roommate that you share a room with, you can lock it, but it keeps everything stored. And each little shelf, I guess you could call it, it has one for needles, one for alcohol, one for adhesives, whatever it may be, but it looks unsuspecting to someone who may not be comfortable completely sharing their diabetes yet. And I think finding those creative ways that relate to you for how to take your diabetes to college with you, literally, is going to be helpful in that transition. But also, kind of as Melissa was saying before, having those sick day kits, because a lot of times you go off to college and they're like, okay, well, here's some cough medicine. Well, this isn't sugar free. What am I supposed to do with it? And they're like, go graduate. We don't know what to tell you.
We don't know what to tell you, so deal with it yourself.
Yeah, it's kind of up to you. Yes. So I think being prepared, or at least if you're not prepared, then finding out where is near to you to get those type of supplies. So I learned that I can get them at Whole Foods, or I can get them at the drugstore that's down the street from my campus, but not everywhere is going to sell, sugar-free cough syrup, unfortunately. So I think making yourself, as we called it on my campus, like a green book. And basically it's a list of places where it's like your speed dial places. You can go there to get supplies if you need to. Or for my CDN chapter, we had a group chat and we would have everyone drop in their needs sometime. Does anyone have a spare infusion set? Does anyone have spare adhesive? And we would meet each other halfway on campus just to get the products that we needed, so we're not stranded out on an island.
Thank you so much for that insight, Shay. And that also really warms my heart about the connection between the, type 1 college kids. And it also makes me feel old because that kind of communication didn't exist when I was in college, nor did CDN. So I'm learning all sorts of wonderful things. Crystal, tell us, how about you?
Yeah, I also like Shay. I also made a big box that I decorated with CDN stickers, and I also told my roommate hey, this is my diabetes box, and this is this, and this is this. So one time she even brought me a Dexcom, so that was really nice of her. And I think something that was unique to me, since I was living far away from home and flying back and forth pretty often, I left 2 Dexcoms, a box of Omnipods back at home, just so I wouldn't have to worry about bringing those on the plane, making sure I have so many. And that just made it really easy because I didn't have to worry about, am I making sure I'm packing so many things for winter break? And yeah, I feel like that just made diabetes so much more stress-free.
That's great, having a supply at home and at school. Katie, how about from a clinician perspective?
Yeah, so I think all of those ideas are terrific, sort of making your diabetes supply storage your own space. I think that's awesome. I think I'm only just going to add one little practical tidbit to jump off of what Melissa was saying earlier. I love suggesting that parents still stay in charge of a lot of the prescriptions and the supplies, because it gives them something to do,
Mhm.
and they feel like they're still involved in diabetes when they may not necessarily be. But they can organize refills, make sure diabetes tech supplies are being shipped on time. Those sort of tasks that often are very time consuming when you're in college. So I'll just throw that out there as sort of a practical tip to the families out there.
Great. And I think that's important, especially probably early on, freshman, sophomore year, when there's so many other things going on that having parents still kind of, spearhead that is really important. Melissa?
So a couple things I wanted to say, tagging on to what Katie was saying, that we kept Katie's prescriptions here in California, because we figured out, okay, we were flying out in August to move her in. We'd be back in October to go to Parents Weekend. She'd be home for Thanksgiving and then home for Christmas. And then, we figured we'd figure out second semester later. So it didn't make sense to shift all of the prescriptions. And I could stay involved and give me something to do to not worry about things. The other thing I wanted to mention is Bed Bath & Beyond lets you, at your home store, go through like you're registering for a wedding or something, and choose all of the items you want for your dorm room. And you then pick it up at the Bed Bath & Beyond locally for where the university is. So we did that for in California, and then went to New York and picked up our already assembled group of items we wanted. And you can actually pull them out and return things that you decide you don't want at that moment. You don't have to take everything. It's really great. So we got under bed storage. We also got one of those 3 drawer things, plastic things that we didn't end up wanting. So you could, you don't have to schlep everything, like Crystal was saying, on the airplane, which is helpful. Yeah. So that was
Melissa. What a practical tip!
You
are the ultimate mom.
Well,
I have 3 children of my own. They're not quite college age yet, but I'm like taking copious notes here. So awesome.
You can do it for Target too, and know that like all of the in the area. I've had 3 kids go to college, so Wisconsin, Tennessee, New York, and now Berkeley, and they like the Targets will be all out of toothpaste and shampoo. So know that you got to maybe order it ahead, or have an Amazon shipment come, to your hotel or something like that. I mean, it's hard to get stuff sometimes at that. Yeah.
Last minute, or well, even when you get there, because everybody's getting it. So great tips for being prepared, right? When we live with diabetes, we have to be prepared.
Right.
Well, this was kind of a perfect segue into our next thing. We've talked all about supplies and things like that. The doctor's visits, right? So what did you do? It sounds like, people going away to college. Did you keep your doctor at home and see them on breaks? Did you find a new healthcare provider at college? Did you kind of do both? Tell us, Shay, what worked for you?
Honestly, I think the provider part was one of my most stressful parts of diabetes when I first transitioned. And that's because when I was going to my pediatric endocrinologist, I was used to having clinic visits averaging about 2 hours, maybe an hour and a half to 2. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I have class. How am I going to transition that? So there was a little while where I was still in that phase where I was looking for people. And then one day I called one of the local endocrinologists, because where I was, I'm literally at my home, pretty much in my hometown. So I was just on campus when I went to college. So I called another local endocrinologist, and they're like, okay, the average time is 30 minutes. And that was a huge shocker, a good shocker. But getting to know them, that's also where another transition came into, because over a span of about a year, I had like 3 different providers. Mm-hmm. One moved away. The other one moved away, and then I stuck with the third one, and I still have her. But it was interesting getting to know each of them. Well, I only got to know 2 because one transitioned right after the other. So I didn't even get a chance to officially meet her. But going through that transition of going to an adult endocrinologist and then going to different endocrinologists, on top of being in college, that was a lot of time, but it made it better to get someone who was understanding and who's like, okay, wow, you're actually really busy. We need to revamp a lot of things and be understanding that, okay, you're one who's always moving or you're always on the go. So this basal rate might not have worked when you were in high school. So we're going to have to change that or change your carb ratio because you're eating campus food now. So everything's not going to be as stabilized as it was when you were at home and you would come home for dinner. So I think being in that situation of actually transitioning to an actual adult endocrinologist, especially in the area I am, I had no idea what a transitional clinic was. So I didn't know that they existed until I got into the fellowship program. But I think when it came to providers, if there's anything diabetes wise, that's something I would have planned earlier. And
If you could have.
if I could have, most definitely. And a lot of times I think some people, depending on the area, they think it's the automatic responsibility of the pediatric provider and it's almost expected. But I think we all get different scenarios and experiences. So some endocrinologists are more hands-on, some aren't. And a lot of us down here was more like, okay, well, here's a list, pick, good luck.
I think what I'm hearing here is the need for flexibility.
Absolutely.
Because you don't actually know exactly what you're getting into. And I think you bring up a really important point. As a pediatric endocrinologist, we are very hands-on. And I hear you with the 2-hour visits. I mean, I know I feel bad about that, but there's so many people on the team and we all love you and we all, right? And then it is a huge transition to go to adult endocrine. It's just very different and it's more driven by the patient and you're not necessarily used to it. So maybe what I'm also hearing is if there's the possibility, if it works for you and your provider to stick with your peds endo, maybe for freshman and sophomore year and transition later on, then when you don't have so many other transitions, that might be helpful sometimes too.
Actually, it's opposite.
Oh, it's opposite. Okay.
Yes. I think that maybe your junior, senior year, if pediatric endocrinologists made a transition to simulate what it would be like for adult endocrinologists, it would be an easier transition rather than, extending the pediatric time because we're not pediatrics anymore.
That's a great point. Well, Crystal, tell us what was it like for you?
Yeah, I ended up keeping my endo at home. It was based on how much I was traveling back at home. So having those endocrinologist appointments back at home forced me to visit and see my family. So I think that's what my family really enjoyed. And I think the flexibility part of it was also a big factor in me deciding to keep my endo. He was also available on phone or on video call. So that made things a lot easier. And during the time when I was like biking around campus and like experiencing all these new things, he was there. I'd just be able to call and like, hey, like this isn't working for me. And then he'd call a couple days later and like, try this rate and try this. And so it was just really nice to be able to go back and forth without actually seeing him in person.
Awesome. Well, Katie, what's your perspective on this?
Well, I think what I'm hearing from both Shay and Crystal is that having a team can make things easier. And so whether that happens and you make that transition to adult endocrinology or you're still in pediatrics, having a team that you can reach out to for prescriptions in an emergency of somebody that you just know is there is really important. And there's a lot of research out there that this age, this sort of 18 to 30 can get lost in that transition between pediatrics and adults. So I just want to, whatever sort of your plan is, and I think there's lots of different options that everybody's talking about here, just making sure that you have a team that you can go to at all times is really important.
All right, Melissa, what was your experience with your daughter?
So Katie's freshman year when she was at NYU, we decided to do both. And we had a provider that was incredibly flexible and gracious in how he was willing to work with her. And so Katie was looping at the time. And so he called he knew somebody in New York that was technology savvy, okay with looping. And so Katie saw that doctor at Mount Sinai in the fall when she first got to school, and then again in the spring before she came home for the summer. And she saw the peds endo at home at Stanford in August before she left and during winter break. And they were willing to communicate and they were willing to share lab results. And even though their EMRs didn't work, but they were really collaborative and very gracious in doing that. And it worked beautifully. It gave her a little bit of a taste of adult endo life. And it also calmed me down because I still had access to the peds endo team, which I loved that team. So.
Absolutely. I actually, it takes me back a few years, but did something a little bit similar. I kept my peds endo at home. And then I actually, in the college health service at Northwestern, there was like an internal medicine physician who just helped me. I mean, so my peds endo at home and the internist in Chicago kind of worked together, and it really was a great synergy. So what I've loved here is that there are a variety of different experiences, and they all worked. Yeah. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about family dynamics, right? So family dynamics are different regardless if you have diabetes or not, right? You go off to college, you're not at home anymore. There's no longer a curfew, right? It's different. Now throw diabetes on top of that and continuous glucose monitoring and parents who sometimes are watching that very frequently and reaching out. And so, how did you navigate that? And did you do some bargaining or make some kind of a communication agreement so that that your parents weren't too worried, right? Because they care and they really worry, but that you didn't feel smothered. So Shay, kick us off. What worked for you?
Sure. So one thing about my family, and it's not to say that they weren't on top of it, but they were very independent based. So they allowed me to do things on my own per se, because I'd had diabetes for so many years, and I was taught right after I was diagnosed, like literally 1 week after I was diagnosed, the ins and outs of it. So I remember being 8 years old and learning about how to give myself injections and do site changes and count carbs. And during that time, I'm like, I don't want to learn any of this. But going off to college, I'm like, I'm so glad that I did, because by the time I got there, it's like, you would talk to them or you would see them sometime, but it's like, okay, you're doing good. I'm fine. Okay, cool. And it was just like that. If I needed something, I knew I could call them. If something was wrong, or I had a really bad sick day, I'm like, okay, I cannot do this on my own. I knew that they would be there, but for the most part, it was a thing like, you've been taught all that we know, all that all that the doctors told us to know. So it's up to you with what you want to do with it now, because you're at a point where you're independent, you've moved out. And that's a big point of, like I said before, I was in my hometown. So I lived about 20 minutes from campus, but it was also a thing like, okay, well, we'll see you on campus. And that was so that even with diabetes, I would know how to live independently, because after college, after grad school, everything is done. I'm eventually going to move out on my own. So it was more of a thing where they had that hope and faith and transparency that everything is okay, but also we're not going to smother you. We're going to let you be responsible and independent. And I actually had the opposite experience from Melissa, because I had it on the front of my phone where all my apps are. My CVS app, I had my doctor's app. Everything was listed in one place, so that, okay, I know I have a doctor's appointment on this day. I need to leave early so I can get there. I know that I need to reorder my insulin or my prescriptions. And knowing myself, I might forget. So I would have auto refill at CVS, or I would have a calendar invite that says, you need to go ahead and reorder this, because that was part of that responsibility building. I had to learn that myself early on.
Great. And so Crystal, I'd like to hear from you. And what might be a little different is interesting because Shay, you had lived with diabetes for a very long time before going off to college, right? Whereas Crystal, it was kind of all brand new. So how did you navigate that with your family?
Yeah, it was obviously a very scary thing. But I feel like my parents, they were learning alongside me. And to this day, they still don't know that they can see my Dexcom. So I'd like to keep that on the down low.
Are they watching today or no?
I hope not. But yeah, I feel like they were still learning alongside me. And whenever I had troubles with my insurance, when I was trying to get my prescriptions, my mom was like ready to fight for me and tell them what's going on. And it was just really nice to have that support and always knowing that they're there. And yeah, I was really lucky that they were learning too, and there wasn't really much anger or anything like that. And so that's what I'm most grateful for when I was newly diagnosed, because I've seen on the other side, parents are really stressed out, like hovering. But I was really lucky that my parents were willing to give me my independence, because this was something that I was going to have to tackle independently for the rest of my life. And so, yeah, it was just nice to have that kind of support.
Well, thank you, Crystal, for sharing that. Katie, I bet you have a lot to add here with your line of work and navigating between, young adults and parents. So have at it.
Yeah, so I think Crystal brought up something really important about diabetes when you are off at college, of all of the sharing. Everybody's wearing diabetes tech, and Dr. McVean, you mentioned when you were off at school, there were no CGMs. And so this dynamic, this family dynamic is totally different, that parents potentially have access to all of this information. And I think it is so important. We've sort of talked about communication and how to communicate, but and maybe even having a communication agreement. But it's so important to have these conversations before heading off of, if that CGM is alarming at 3 a.m., what is the next step? So that everybody's on the same page, because I've seen many times there's a lot of conflict, and you, as a college student, you're wanting to go off and be independent and be able to do diabetes on your own. But mom and dad or parents are just so worried about this whole process that there can be a lot of miscommunication. There can be a lot of conflict. So I think my biggest piece of advice is that you got to recognize that these dynamics are going to change, and we want to foster independence. We want to foster diabetes management that is independent, but also we want to be able to communicate in a way that is helpful, that the information is actionable. So if we are only sort of sending those urgent texts if the blood sugar is super high or super low or something like that, that information needs to sort of be discussed and how it will be approached, of just that their communication changes dramatically when you're off at school, and it's important to have those conversations before you leave so that there's less conflict and you guys can work as a team in the way that you always have during that transition.
Thank you so much for that insight, Katie. And Melissa, tell us, how did you and Katie navigate it? How did it go?
So Katie was diagnosed before there was follow. So she had a Medtronic pump very first thing, and she had Medtronic CGM first thing. And when follow came along, it was definitely a learning experience. And in high school, we figured out a way to communicate that we sort of continued into college, which was, and we let her define it. So if she was over a certain number for a certain number of hours, we were allowed to text her, have you corrected? And she would respond, yes, or thanks for the reminder, or I'll do it now, or whatever, just so that I knew it was being addressed. And we kind of dropped that high prompt when she went off. I should come back to that. For low, we were allowed to text her if she hit 70 and was dropping. We could text her and say, "Do you need help?" And she would respond. And if she didn't respond right away, we were allowed to call her. So that was the protocol we had in high school. At some point, her senior year, to give her a chance to sort of practice things, I turned off my high alarm. So I was she knew when she was above range. She knew when what to do. If she was above range, she could do that. So I was aware, but I didn't have the alarms going off. I gave her that chance. And that continued until actually the peds endo asked us to put a high alarm at 400, just because he was worried about DKA. So, and it actually never hit 400. I think Katie was worried about inconveniencing her roommate. And so she really did a good job of keeping herself in range because she didn't want to wake her roommate up with alarms. So.
Melissa, I'm so proud of you as a mom in high school for like turning that alarm off. Like that had to have been hard for you. That's not easy.
Yeah, I think of transitioning the care from being the manager of your kid's diabetes. Katie was diagnosed at 11, so she really couldn't manage it on her own then. But moving from manager to coach and having her have opportunities to make mistakes and learn what works for her in an environment where she had some oversight, right? She was in our home. I could hear alarms, that kind of stuff. That was better than shipping her off to school across country without any practice, right? You don't teach a kid to drive by throwing them the keys and say, "Hey, go try that out and see how it goes." You get in the car next to them and you say, "Okay, before you start the car, before you turn the key, you put your foot on the brake. Then you look behind you and you make sure you're not backing up into anybody. Then you put it into gear and you sit there next to them and you experience it with them, giving them some suggestions along the way in, an empty parking lot before you take it out on the road." It's the same way with diabetes.
Absolutely. That is absolutely. So it's here, move-in day. Everyone's super excited. It's September now. So what was it like arriving on campus, and did you share with your roommate that you had diabetes, and when, and what about professors, and did you connect with disability services? And I'll just say briefly, my journey with diabetes is that I told no one for about 20 years, because after I was diagnosed, I wasn't allowed to go on field trips anymore. The school didn't let me, and I wasn't invited to sleepovers or anything. So I decided that I just wouldn't tell anyone so I wouldn't be left out. And so I actually didn't really tell anyone I had diabetes until I was about 30. And so when I reflect on all these questions that CDN is having me bring up, I'm like, wow, these are excellent questions. And I wish I had been attending something like this before I went off to college. So Shay, tell us all about it.
Yes. So that was actually one of the, I guess you could say, from the previous questions, communication plans that I have with my family. It's like, okay, make sure whoever you're with, whether it's your professor, your roommates, your friends, make sure they know that you have it and they know what to do, because you don't want to go low and they're like, oh, well, she has this thing in her purse, maybe we should give her insulin. It's like, okay, teach them the opposite. Let them know, okay, this is for your lows, this is for your highs, and this is what to do in the meantime, just so that they have an idea. And especially when it came to my professors, I really didn't have a good understanding of the Disability Resource Center until like the second semester, endish of my freshman year. So, or sophomore year, early college type time. But the biggest thing that I would always establish to them before I knew of the actual system and the actual letter system that we would go through DRC is to send them an email, let them know, okay, if you see me with this device, this isn't a a phone, it's my insulin pump. Or if I seem like I'm zoning out, I'm not paying attention to you. I'm just might be experiencing a high blood sugar episode or a low blood sugar episode. And it's something that I need to handle with my diabetes, and I'll be able to catch up on your material at a later time. And if there's anything that you can do to help, whether that's record the PowerPoints or have someone that I can sit by to help me with my notes when this stuff happens, I'll let you know, and just establish that transparency. And just to remember that even though we see our professors and they are like the biggest part of us getting our degree, there's more people that we need to acknowledge. So I'll say for my roommates, I told them that I had it, and one of them would always give me a chocolate bar just in case. And I thought that was the sweetest thing ever. And I thought it was hilarious at first because I'm like, wow, we really don't know the history of chocolate, but it was like that was actually one of the weird things when I first got diagnosed. It's like, okay, there are certain things that you eat, there are things you can't eat, and that kind of transitioned over time. But I think like explaining that information to my roommates and also like letting them know that, okay, this might be a needle, but it's not scary. I'm not hurt. If anything, it's an emergency. And then also, as you can see here, I'm wearing Greek letters. This was another very important piece of people to tell because I was around them all of the time. And especially when joining my organization, I was around them almost every day. So if it's a time where it's like, okay, I'm having a really high blood sugar day or I'm having a really low blood sugar day, this is the situation, and letting them know and they actually understand that, that's a huge piece of it. Because even though you have your people who are older than you and you have roommates that you live with, you still have your peers. And it's important for them to know and to be accustomed to it because they're going to be around you just as much as your family was around you.
Great. Thank you, Shay. Crystal.
Yeah, at the beginning, when I was first in the dorms, I didn't tell anybody either. I only told my roommate that I shared the room with, and I told her in person because I was actually in the ED when I was first meeting her on Facebook, like, hey, you want a room? So yeah, I ended up telling her in person, and she was really understanding because it was something brand new.
When you say you were in the ED, do you mean like you were in the ED at your initial diagnosis and that's when you were like
Messaging her, like,
messaging
hey,
her about your, oh my goodness. Oh,
wow. And I remember she was like, oh, I'm at prom right now. And I was like, cool.
Gosh, I wish I was at prom and not just being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Wow, what a juxtaposition.
Yep. It was a fun time. But yeah, I ended up telling her in person and she was really understanding. And she was like really willing to learn alongside me. Like, hey, this is what, like if I'm feeling faint or something, give me glucose tabs or, yeah, she was just really understanding. And now that I've gained more confidence and I really know like how to tell people, I hold like meetings with my roommates in my apartment. And at the beginning I tell them, okay, this is my needles. And yeah, they're all really nice about it. And whenever they hear my alarms, they look at me like, Crystal, you need to fix that. Crystal, you need to eat. So yeah, it's really nice. And then connecting with the accommodations center, I actually found out about accommodations and getting accommodations for diabetes through my endocrinologist. And I had no idea about it since I didn't get them in high school. And so I'm really, really glad that I did because then I was connected to CDN. And that's just really changed my whole college experience, I feel like, even though I was really shy about diabetes in the first place. So yeah, I feel like that's just really helped me in my diabetes growth.
And how amazing that from the time when you first got there to the time now that you're graduating in 2 days, that you've come to that place. That's really wonderful. Well, Katie, what advice do you have for us?
I just want to say I love hearing all of these positive experiences about disclosing your diabetes and finding your people and finding people that support you in your diabetes, because I think that's huge. I will throw out there that sometimes the disclosure doesn't go as smoothly. And people may say negative things or inappropriate things, or just they don't understand what type 1 diabetes is. And just the little piece of advice that I would give is come up with a joke that you can make back. Use humor in that situation. Most people are not saying those things to be mean, even though it feels horrible when they say them. And that's reasonable. It's normal to feel horrible when people say stupid things. That's normal. But to just try to not let it bring you down, know that it's from a spot of ignorance. And it's not your job to educate everyone about diabetes, but using humor can just sort of make it a little bit lighter and move on. But I'm so happy to hear all of you having such positive experiences when the people around you. And I hope that everybody listening has positive experiences around disclosing diabetes. But I just thought it was important to throw in that there might be negative responses too.
And Melissa, how did it go for Katie?
I think it went fine. She, in terms of disclosing to friends or to her roommate, and we asked that she let her RA know. Looking back now, I don't know that that was really necessary. RA is not going to be able to do anything anyway. RA certainly won't share their contact information. They shouldn't. So I don't know. That was probably unnecessary. But we let her do that. And I asked her to do it on move-in day, and we also asked her to let her roommate know on move-in day, but let her do that and just asked her to just confirm back with us before we leave that you've had those conversations. So we let her. I don't actually know how they went. I never had to contact the roommate. The roommate actually left after the end of the first semester, so then she had a single, which was my biggest fear, that I didn't want her to. I wanted somebody to be in the room to hear her Dexcom alarms, but it didn't really matter anyway. The other thing was that she managed her accommodations herself, pretty much. NYU was really forthcoming and offered accommodations. Do you need accommodations? And you could download a form, which we took to the Peds Endo. I think the fact that our Peds Endo team had talked about accommodations and 504 plans all the way around meant that it didn't feel gratuitous or unnecessary. Really, Katie understood why she had a 504, and so it made sense to have accommodations in college. And she's done a beautiful job of, advocating for herself and taking care of that. But it's worked well for her to have those accommodations, both at NYU and at UC Berkeley.
Great. Well, thank you, Melissa, and all of you. We just have a few minutes left, and we want to make sure we get to some questions from the chat. So, Diane, are you going to jump in? Oh, here. Oh, I just saw one for a second. Oh, and then it went away. Okay, it's back. Okay. During school, we as parents were around to support the child on campus and do the advocacy. Now the kids are on their own. What are 2 to 3 single most important things to do you recommend for a young adult? And I'll just let anyone on the panel jump in here. Katie, this seems like this might be up your alley. What do you want to jump in?
I think I'm going to speak sort of generally, maybe not as concretely as this commenter might like me to be. But you can still support your child and you can still advocate for your child, even when they're on the college campus. But it's likely going to be through your child who is the student and they're over 18 and all this stuff, but you can still be their support system. And so I think, I guess to maybe comment on a couple of concrete things like managing supplies, maybe being a contact person for the disability office to navigate what forms they need, sort of just coordinating maybe endo appointments when they come home, some sort of concrete things that you can take on. Those might be helpful, but it really depends on the family. So I would also encourage you to speak with your child if there's anything concrete that they would find helpful. Anyone else sort of have thoughts? Yeah.
Go for it.
I realized somewhere late high school for Katie that the more I did, the less she did. And so I learned that I needed to step back and give her some space to do and be her own advocate. That if I always jumped in and did it, it didn't give her the opportunity. So now's the chance to give them that space and that time and that opportunity to speak up for themselves. They've heard you do it probably a million times. Katie heard me do it. She did a beautiful job of doing it for herself.
That's great, Melissa. Diane, do we have, I know we're running short on time. Do we have another question from the chat? Is it better to have a roommate or be in a single? Okay, we'll let Shay and Crystal have at it.
Well, if I can vote, I'm gonna be in a single. I will be by myself. A lot of times, you feel more comfortable being with someone. If anything, to start off, it might be more comfortable being with a housemate rather than a roommate, where you don't have to share a room with a person every single day. But rather than, when I first moved in, fortunately, how my campus was set up, they had a certain type of freshman housing where you could have your own room, but you were still in a quarter with 4 other people. So it was like, being at home where you had your space, but you live with other people. And I think if you want to be by yourself, but you still want to kind of wing yourself into that, that might be a good way to start. Or, find someone who's like, oh, do you want to rent this together and move in, but you're not in each other's breathing space all the
On
time.
top of each other. That's a great point. Crystal, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel like it was kind of nice to have a roommate at first, just so I could get like acclimated to college and living away from home, and just have someone to talk to. And so I feel like that was nice at first, but as we kind of like had our different interests and we're joining different clubs and things like that, it was nice to have a single now. So yeah.
Yeah. Do we have time for one more question? Okay, this might be the last one. I'm curious about how students find type 1 diabetes support at university. Through student wellness office, student disability office, not at all. What are your experiences, current or recent students? Anyone jump in?
I'll say my experience as, the different resources we did have, your professors trying to help. Honestly, the best type of connections that I made with students was random. And that would just be by being in class or seeing them on campus and noticing a Dexcom or noticing something on their arm, and then starting that conversation. It's like, oh, well, this student, they have it too. And then growing like that. And I think that's
You
more
looked
authentic.
for it. Yeah, you looked for it. Yeah. Well, we are, sadly, I think we could all keep doing this and we would absolutely love it. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And I'm going to kick it back to Diane, and she is going to bring it home for us.
Oh my gosh, thank you all so much. I know everyone was here, and we could applaud and say thanks to Dr. McVean and Shay and Crystal and Katie and Melissa for just sharing of your personal stories and your lived experiences, because there are things to read and resources to reference, but it means a lot to hear it from someone who's been through it. And that we can relate to. So thank you for that. It's a big part of what CDN believes in and what we do, the peer support piece and connecting with our community. So we really appreciate you guys spending your time. What I do want to do, just to close everything out really quickly, is to remind everyone some of the other resources that CDN does have to kind of help support you. You can check out this recording or any of the other recordings from our other topics in this series on our Facebook page, on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to that. There's a lot of content there, but all of these videos from our series are available to you. I think Melissa mentioned the resource guides, the printed guides, and those are pretty valuable. You can download those free of charge from our website. And yes, there are some that are targeted to caregivers, to students, newly diagnosed guides. So definitely check those out. Caregivers or parents, if you have not joined yet, we have a very active parent Facebook group, a private group that you could join, parents of the College Diabetes Network. And, young adults, follow in Shay and Crystal's steps. When you get to campus, look up a chapter. If you don't find one, start one. We are very happy to help you identify schools and existing chapters and to give you all the support and tools that you need if you start one up yourself along the way. And you can, find a map of all of our existing chapters and ways to contact us on our website as well. Lots of other things. We've got an email newsletter, all over the social medias, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc. So stay in touch with us, whatever works for you. We're here to support young adults with diabetes, full stop. And that means supporting your caregivers, your healthcare providers, and everyone, that helps make your experience better. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors of this program, and we hope to connect with you all again soon. Have a great night.